the decision of Red Bull, Max Verstappen, Horner, Red Bull, to not speak to Sky Sports after comments made by Ted Kravitz on Ted's notebook last week. So I just want to get the comments that they're aggrieved over first, just to make sure we're factually and politically correct. Basically, Hamilton doesn't win a race all year, and then finally comes back to the track where he could win the first race all year, battling the same guy who won the race he was robbed in the previous year and manages to finish ahead of him. What a script and a story that would have been. But that's not the way the script turned out today, was it? Because the guy that beat him after being robbed actually overtook him, because he's got a quicker car, because of engineering and Formula One and design, and pretty much because, well, yeah, it's not in the co-op, but Adrian Newey, Red Bull's lead car designer over there. That's what he said after Austin. So based on that, the decision was made not to speak to Sky Sports. So the first thing I'll do is I'll ask you, Liam, did Red Bull do the right thing? Is it fair to add in here that Ted Kravitz didn't actually mention the rob by Max Verstappen? Or where do you see this whole thing in general? Because there is a broader point which we get onto, but in this particular example.
Yeah, I think so. Like it's kind of feeding the flames, as it were. Like if you go anywhere online and talk about Formula One, it's all so polarizing. Like you can even see Ted Kravitz after those comments that he's made, his Instagram is just getting plagued with people abusing him, and comments like this and dragging them or beating a dead horse, basically something that has done, it's over, it's finished. Michael Massey was sacked. We're moving on. We're on to the next year, but they're still bringing it back up. They're still making comments. They're still making jabs at Max and undermining his championship from last year. And it's just feeding the flames and it's keeping things going. And like, you know, these are elite athletes, and they're not immune to what goes on outside and what happens online. Like the Hamilton was booed massively there in Brazil, but Max was booed in Austin last year, or last week even, and like, that has to play on their minds like somewhat. You would imagine, like, and Sky Sports everyone has made comments, everyone talks about it, the constant bias towards Mercedes and Hamilton, and the constant bashing of Max. Like, I'd say they are within their right to do what they did. Like, they've come out and said that they're going to talk to them at their next race, so it only lasted one weekend, which, you know, why wouldn't you carry it on if you're going to keep going? But yeah, like, Christian Horner is always very open with Sky. He's always there for interviews. He's always on the pit wall talking to them. He loves being in front of the cameras as much as the presenters do as well. So to go at them like that, they're constantly at them. Like, I don't blame them for pulling the plug on it.
Barry?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to seen him maybe hand it slightly different. I would like to see him call him on it, you know, to in an interview, as opposed to just kind of not talking to you. But I don't blame them for taking the route they did. There's been a few bits on. I think that, yeah, you know, as Liam says, it's so polarizing and it's so kind of parochial almost the way it's going at the moment, and I don't like that. I think it's. I to be perfectly honest, I think it's like a dumbing down of the sport, and you know, you need to respect everyone, all of them, all the cars, all the drivers, all the team members. You can cheer for one, that's all right, but someone said, you know, extinguishing someone else's candle doesn't make yours burn brighter. Like, you know, just take the lads. You know, you support that team. That's grand. Support that team. You don't have to absolutely hound anyone who likes another team or another color car. It's just so ridiculous. It's just stupid, you know. But anyway, that's the way that the sport has gone. Right. You know, whether you like it or not, unfortunately, and the fan base has gone. But when you think back on it, and it's I've made myself think about it and look back through a few things. There's always been the Hamilton bias, which is understandable. At the end of the day, they are, you know, it's his countryman, you know, they're from the UK. It's a UK production. He's a UK driver, everything else. But it's gone. I mean, if you remember back to, it went back as far as Vettel. There was always this kind of anti-Vettel thing going on in the early 2000s and, you know, 10s, 11s, 12s when he was winning his championships. There was certainly a bit for Alonso. There was, I mean, even go back to Schumacher's time, if you like, which is before Sky Sports. He was, not exactly similar sort of stuff, I suppose, you know. And then even when Nico Rosberg won against Hamilton in the Mercedes, I was reading there was one of the BBC journalists, a respected journalist, was basically, yeah, Rosberg won, but here's why Hamilton didn't. And it basically went into say that, Rosberg, our reigning Formula One world champion, isn't as good a driver as Hamilton. He's just been lucky, and Hamilton's been unlucky. They're like, this is hours after he won a champion. It's just so when you actually start looking at it with a different set of eyes, maybe that I had of previously, it's hard to not see it. And there's definitely something there, whether it be deliberate or not, I don't know. And it could be just a bit of, patriotism, jingoism, whatever you want to call it. But it should be better than that. It's the role of a commentator is to yes, add a bit of color. A little bit of personal opinion isn't bad. It's not, we don't want zombies just iterating out PR press releases and all this sort of stuff. But what Ted said in the notebook after Austin was in itself not the worst thing in the world, but it was probably a bit of the straw that broke the camel's back. That just kind of brought it over the edge. And the irony of it is that by Red Bull choosing not to speak to Sky Sports, it's probably kind of blown up more for them now, if anything. But they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't in that respect. And it's sad to see, people turning on Ted Kravitz, who I actually have a lot of time for. I think he brings a lot of interesting qualities to the sport, and he's kind of likable sort of chap to watch. He has his opinions, that's fine. But no one likes to see these sort of death threats and all that absolute rubbish that's going towards him at the moment. That's just beyond the pale, no matter what way you look at it.
Yeah, no, that's completely out of order, and that is all too common nowadays. Unfortunately, we don't want to see that. We just want to debate the whole thing, I suppose, in a civilized way and have a look
play
at
the ball, not the man, isn't it? That's the thing. You can sit there and give out about the Massey and the FIA and all the rest of it, but it's not Red Bull's fault. It wasn't Verstappen's fault at the end of the day. That's where the line needs to be drawn. There's been, every other championship that's been won through the course of F1 history probably has somebody somewhere saying, Jesus, I don't know about their engine, or I don't know, there's been loads of it. Mercedes themselves, built an extra engine for Brazil last year, flouted the rules and took the penalty so that they'd have a very, very fast engine for the Brazilian race. That's breaking the rules, so to speak. But, is that rule, not as important as the other rule? Like who gets to decide that? They're all at it. Let's be honest. They're all going to push it to the absolute limit. And if an opportunity presents themselves, they're going to take it. Every one of them, Hamilton, Alonso, you name it. Every one of the drivers on that grid will take it when it presents to themselves, to them. But it's not their fault in most cases.
Yeah, actually, I know we're going off topic a little bit, but it was also a juicy one. Alonso's comments about Hamilton's world titles. He won. We know he won 7. And I need to get the exact quote from Alonso, which I don't have to hand. But basically, he was kind of discounting a few of those on the basis that he was only competing with his teammate because his car was so good. That's a big,
I think to paraphrase, it was basically Verstappen's mean more than Alonso was to say, and I'm paraphrasing. Verstappen's titles mean more because he had to beat other people in other cars, not just his teammate, in the same car, or words to something. That's the effect he was getting across, and he's not wrong. He's not. At the end of the day, he's not. Now the problem with Alonso is that he was Hamilton's. And did you see the tweet that Hamilton put up, which is just a picture of him on the podium ahead of Alonso? But that's grand. It's just these guys are not machines. They're just they're 30. Well, I was going to say 30 odd year olds, 40 in Alonso's case. Just ribbing each other and get sure, what harm? It's fine. It doesn't have to be factually 100% correct, about it. And yeah, someone's going to find something that happened 10 years ago, or someone said something 10 years ago that doesn't match up with what they're saying now. But it's probably there probably is an element of truth in it. At the end of the day, Verstappen won the championship for Red Bull last year, and Red Bull won the championship for Verstappen this year. Insofar as the car that Verstappen has this year is faster and better in general than his competitors, and that's helped him to win the championship this year. Verstappen's driving and just doggedness last year won the championship for him over a more superior Mercedes car. That's the way it goes. It's there's so yeah, Alonso's right. He probably Alonso doesn't say anything. He probably does have for a bit of a reaction sometimes, and he gets it, and we all talk about him, and but sure, why not? As I said, we got to bear in mind, but not that long ago, we were all going on about F1 drivers being robots and not saying anything, and they have no personality and they don't open their mouth. And now we have a situation where every time one of them opens their mouth, there's a gazillion people on Twitter fact checking them and going back to say, well, in 2006, on the 14 minutes past, you said this. So they're just going to revert back to just saying nothing again if we keep pulling everything they say apart.
Anything on any of that, Liam? Because I know there was an awful line in there.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you as well. Like, Alonso does like the sound of his own voice a little bit. He does like to be in the headlines and stuff like that. But he's not really wrong. Bottas, when he came on the scene after Rosberg retired, he was never really at the races. Like sometimes, some years he didn't even finish second in the championship. Like when he's like Hamilton is so far ahead with his car. So like Hamilton ran away with it because they were so dominant. Max is doing it at the tail end of this season because Ferrari should be up there, but for whatever reason they're well off the pace now. And as you said, like Red Bull supplied it this year. They supplied the car, and Max is running away with it. Everyone got bored watching Hamilton win. I didn't watch a lot of Formula One when Hamilton was in his dominance because you turn it on and no one would change places. Where you started in qualifying was where you finish, and it's still a great achievement by Lewis. Like not to take anything away from him, but it's not as impressive really when they're so dominant. Like there was an element in Mercedes when they were so dominant as to how to not make people hate them as much in their marketing meetings because they were so dominant to try and offset that a little bit. Because that's how much they were winning. Like where they had to consciously try and make them more likable because people were starting to hate them so much.
I'm going to bring it back then to this whole thing about the so-called bias and all, and try bring another bit of flavour to it. So obviously Richie threw up a tweet there a couple of nights ago in relation to the so-called bias or whatever, and he said that he thought Max should have called Sky Sports out as well instead of the silence. And then I prompted a bit of debate underneath it. I wanted to kind of individualize it a little bit and maybe put a disclaimer that I personally wouldn't have much of a problem with the way Brundle carries, I suppose, his opinions and all. I think he's very straight, Button to a lesser extent. And then Conor Murphy came in and mentioned Paul di Resta, who I'd probably put in there a little bit as well now, not to the same extent as the other two. And I'll get your thoughts on that in a moment. But our friends over at the First Corner F1 podcast said that I think every English-speaking territory should get its own commentators and pundits like in the 90s and 90s, like when RT had theirs. You should see how passionate the French, Dutch, Spanish, Italians get, but Sky UK just get accused of bias. I think it's very natural, petulant of Red Bull, in my opinion. Now, the thing I just want to add to that is, in contrast to going back an era or two, Sky are the content kind of provider, we'll say, for the F1 feed as well, which goes out to America now. So is there an element that while this is going out obviously on Sky UK, are they slightly forgetful that it is actually a world feed as well? And do they get maybe drawn into that? And is that why we see this, I say, quote unquote, bias? Do you think that's a factor, lads? And whichever wants to take it up there, Beltway.
Yeah, I think it is definitely a factor. I mean, I don't know Liam, what your thoughts on it, but it is a factor. How deliberate or not it is a different one.
What do you think,
Yeah,
Paul?
yeah, I would think like they're always going to cheer for their own lads. Like you're not going to watch rugby at the weekend and cheer for South Africa. Like you're going to cheer for Ireland. So there is an element of that, but they have to be conscious that this does go out everywhere. Like there's no bias in ESPN for Haas being the American team because it's the Sky feed. They don't really talk about them. They just focus on their lads, the Lando Norrises, the to a lesser extent, and the Lewis Hamiltons. So I like what they're feeding into and what they're kind of doing. I think there has to be an element of they have to realize that there's other people listening than just the people in the UK, the English, like that want to just hear about Lewis Hamilton and stuff like that. So yeah, like it enrages you sometimes when you're just sitting there and you're tuning in and Mercedes been well off the pace all year, and they're talking about is this the weekend that Mercedes are finally going to get their win, and then Lewis Hamilton doesn't get out of Q2 or something. It's always just driving the same thing, the point that's not really there to be driven for most of the season.
Yeah, there is a kind of maybe it's subconscious with Crofty, maybe it's not, but you can hear in his voice when he's talking about Hamilton that bit more, and Russell as well, to be honest with you. But maybe not to the same extent. Just if he's doing a lap or whatever, there's just that little bit more, I think, more often than what you would hear in terms of excitement with other drivers up around the top end. That's something I definitely would notice personally. But what do you think about the other guys that I've mentioned there? I think that's where a lot of people are maybe falling down a bit. It is unfair to just say everyone at Sky F1's coverage is like this, because there is so much of them there. And what do you think? Like, I think Brundle's fantastic, lads.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Brundle. Like even his earlier stuff where he was always going out and driving the cars and the insight that he'd bring, and the same with Button. Like for the likes of myself and yourself that has never raced cars, and listening to Brundle and Jensen talking about how they're doing stuff, how they can see the lads fighting the wheels, the steering wheel, and trying to get traction, and what they should be doing here and there and everywhere. They're a lot more interesting to listen to than Crofty just shouting over everyone. But even like Brundle, I think Jensen and Brundle are a lot more less bias on them as well. Like there at the weekend in the build up, they were talking about the Red Bull breaching the budget cap and how
it was budget crap. You're right.
Yeah, budget crap. £300,000 over, and they were trying to label it. That's why Max Verstappen won 2 world championships. It's because they overspent by 300,000. And Brundle was there and called them straight out, and it's like, you can't say that. You can't say something like that. There's no way that you can buy 2 world championships for just £300,000. He's the only one that is always there, that is just talking about everyone else.
Is that, sorry, Liam, to interrupt you slightly. Is that not a Brundle? I think the drivers obviously bring a big, like you said, behind the scenes kind of expertise to it. To like you said, lads who haven't drove cars before. But I think beyond that, what they do is they bring a kind of a practicality, a pragmatism of it, I suppose, more than anything else. That they know that you'd like to David Croft and commentators. Got to bear in mind that their role is to add color and spruce it up, and yes, they be shouty and all of these things to which is kind of what Murray Walker did. He was enthusiastic. He was the best of them, obviously, but it's the same sort of thing. They need to twist the dial. They need to turn the dial and get make something that's not exciting. And that's where I think where the drivers come in from the other side and go, like I said earlier, look, Ricardo doesn't just remember how to drive. Let's calm down. To kind of offset that kind of, shoutiness with a little bit of pragmatism, with a little bit of, well, in reality, lads, what actually happens is and I think that's why the drivers' punditry is sometimes a little bit more balanced, because it's not as gung-ho and kind of peaks and valleys as sometimes the commentator, the main commentators, kind of the color commentators, I call them, to try to go for. They're all into a big, like, oh, Hamilton's after doing this, or Norris is after doing that because he's so brave, and he's a gladiator, and Button's looking at it going, well, no, it's his tire temperature has just came in better because a mechanic put an extra 2 degrees of camber onto the car that they realized they need. It's not as exciting, but it's probably what happened. As opposed to this, like he's just amazing, and he's just after deciding to go 2 seconds a lap quicker because he had his Weetabix this morning or something, like So that's the reality of it, and it's not as interesting, unfortunately, as the kind of the hero driver type element. But that is generally speaking what happens in it. And that's where I prefer to. I would disagree on the rest of the thing. I think the rest of it is just too flat. I don't think he says anything. He says he doesn't criticize anyone. He doesn't big up anybody on the other side. I think he's just a little bit too cautious, maybe,
That's because he's
in
trying to get
his
back in.
delivery. Well, yeah, well, I mean, I think that boat has definitely sailed at this stage. But he is a little bit just bland for me. But it kind of shows the point. It is this fine line that they have to walk between being bland and being, getting the grief that Kravitz is getting. It's a small envelope they have to operate in. And to be fair, it's live TV. Going out to millions of people, and in Tate Kravitz's defense, he's doing that kind of notebook thing. It's got to be difficult, walking around trying to find something to talk about, live and in the moment. Doesn't excuse it, but might be a little bit behind where maybe his mouth just got a little bit ahead of his brain on that one.
In fairness, all season Ted hasn't been too bad. That's probably the most he's ever said about last year and stuff like that. He's always kind of brushed past it and gotten on with it. So I've always liked listening to him and watching him afterwards, because he was the least insufferable of them all, really.
Yeah.
How I lame of it.
Yeah.
You see, and just to pick up on something that you said, Barry, like I think if you hear Crofty putting the same excitement and colour into every driver, like what Murray Walker used to, for most part, I thought. Like the only real standout for Murray Walker was, and understandably so, when Damon Hill won the World Championship, and I think I got a lump in my throat. That's
that's fine.
Fair.
Yeah.
There's connection there. But I can recall so many things where, and it's feeling it, and it's Senna, and it's Prost, and it's done with the same vigor and excitement. But I don't see that consistently enough with every driver, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. With Crofty, that's where I take issue a little bit. I just think it's
probably one of those
with certain drivers.
It's probably one of those things that you gotta. What was it someone said to me a while ago? Normally the saying is you gotta see it to believe it, which is the typical saying. But if you turn that saying on its head, you gotta believe it to see it. Sometimes if you believe something, you'll see it as a result.
Exactly.
And I think it's like your story. You buy a silver car, every car is silver. Like if you, for whatever reason, if you've got that in your head, you're probably going to see it more and more and more and pick up on things. Some of them rightly, maybe some of them not so rightly. And it's that the problem with that is it's a bit of a snowball then at that stage, because then they can't open their mouth without people going, oh, that's what he meant there, or oh, he didn't mean this here. To be honest, personally, the kind of Crofty and stuff, that type of commentary generally washes over me, because I think it's performance. I think that is their role. It's performance, it's theatre, it's make it exciting, shout and roar and do all this sort of stuff. The stuff I really have an ear for is more just the expertise, the technicals, that sort of stuff, because there's a bit of theatrical license with the other stuff that I'd always kind of give the Crofties and whatever of this world, because at the end of the day, that is their job, to shout and roar and make it exciting. Nobody wants, like, that's why James Hunt and Murray Walker work so well, or Brundle and Crofty. It's the yin and the yang, and two Brundles wouldn't be the same as one of each. No, exactly. Yeah. It needs to
but
work together.
Different in any sport, though. Like, that's the wholly all of it. And sometimes when you see, and this has never happened that I can recall anywhere, no clear example. If Crofty was trying to do Brundle's role and Brundle was trying to do Crofty's role, it doesn't work. I've seen it in radio. I've seen very, very good analysts that might be with me at a GA game, we'll say. And maybe one day they're turning into be a main commentator. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Completely different thing.
And you might be able to answer this one for me. Well, me, that's pretty one-dimensional in the sports that I follow. But is there another sport that has such worldwide exposure, coupled with a consistent two-person? I know there's others that come and go, but generally speaking, a sport with that sort of worldwide exposure, with that amount of events in a year, with the same two commentators talking about the same 20 protagonists. I can't think of a sport where that would happen. You know what I mean? Like, if you think of soccer, in the UK, you've got the UK Championship, the other championships. I don't know any of them, but
the other football.
There's like, was it Serie A or something in Italy, and all the Bundesliga, whatever they call them, right? They've all these other and even they're all independent of each other. They'd all then have different matches with different, they're not playing the same people match in, match out. To my ear, they don't have the same commentary teams time into, they have a bigger spread of commentary, and that's only nationally. So, imagine a World Cup type setup where you have the same 20 teams playing each other and somehow or other every second week for the entire year with the same two commentators talking on it. You're going to find problems with that sheer volume and quantity of airtime. And so I don't think it's a Formula One problem. I think it's literally no other sport has those set of circumstances to be compared to. And if they did, maybe we would just go, oh yeah, sure, that's normal. Should that happen in the tennis last week or the golf next week or whatever? So I think that needs to be taken into account as well, as opposed to just the whole, throwing labels at people and stuff.
Yeah, maybe so. I'll take your point. The one thing I suppose I would add to that is it is really, I suppose, dependent on who the parent are and maybe how good they are. And that's a generally speaking thing. It's something to do with this particular example. But it's a very good point that I never thought about on a world scale. It's something maybe that you might see in Ireland when it comes to maybe a local level when there's football matches on and maybe they're just doing one at the weekend or something like that. I don't mean on TV. I mean local radio now as such. It will be, it can be common enough, but definitely not an international one. It's a very good point. Never really thought of that, I suppose. So
the other side to think of it too is like but the big difference is like you go back. I'm just sitting here. There's a Senna poster in my room. He's look the movie poster looking back at me. It's just prompted me to think of something. Every time Senna won a race in the Brazilian commentary, they played a particular type of music as he crossed the line, which was 30, 40 seconds, very kind of emotional, let's go lads sort of type music. So this isn't, that's pretty unbiased, let's be honest, full orchestra music banging out like as soon as sent across the line. So they were biased. I think the difference there though, as you said earlier, was that was a Brazilian winning with Brazilian commentators exclusively for a Brazilian audience. I think the Sky thing is the fact that the world feed is or the English speaking feed rather is where it maybe falls down. But again, it's a numbers thing, it's the whole world is criticizing them as opposed to just Spanish speakers or whatever it might be.